Hello, and thank you for joining me today. Well, this is the Wednesday, March 19th edition of our video devotionals. Thank you so much for joining us today, and hope your Wednesday is going well. It is the middle part of the work week and school week. Of course, it's church time for many of us, so be in attendance if you can. And I do appreciate folks who prayed for us for our traveling and for our part that we played in the Spring Share-a-thon, which is still ongoing at FBN Radio, and we were able to do a shift on Monday, a shift yesterday, and then we left right after my shift at 7, headed back to Archdale, and got in somewhere around 11:30ish or so, maybe 11:15, 11:30, and so good traveling and good fellowship, able to help out with the getting the funds for the radio station. If you're still interested in knowing anything about that, or listening to that share-a-thon, then I would encourage you to go to fbnradio.com and just see what's going on. And then if you're able to give, then give. And that'd be a wonderful thing, okay? All right, so this is Wisdom Wednesday. So what we're going to do is we're going to be in chapter 16 and verse number 7, a very, very interesting verse, and we're getting ready to read this. But again, we appreciate the prayers. I appreciate the prayers on Christy's family's behalf. The passing of her great aunt. Of course, we've got a dear lady. She had an aunt pass away, and we've got folks that, we all have needs, but take some time to pray for people when you specifically hear about them. And I know there's a lot to pray about, but it's not too much for God to hear, and certainly not too much for God to do something about. All right? All right, notice here in Proverbs 16:7, it says this: when a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. I look at that and say, wow, Lord, I know there are enemies of God. There's enemies of God's people. And you're telling me that if my ways please you, then my enemies will be at peace with me. Well, let's look at this just a minute here. Think about it. In any case, when it comes to a child of God, nothing comes into our life without the permission of God, okay? I know that maybe is said a lot of ways, but you know what? We belong to God, and God doesn't just say, oh, I didn't see that one get through, and our enemies, let's say, would do something to us. The truth is, God allows things. So number one, here's what we do not know. Whoever opposes us, whether we know who they are or not, it is God that when we please him, that God can make sure our enemies are at peace with us. In other words, we don't see that assault upon us. So we could easily say, well, I've got enemies. I serve the Lord, and therefore I've had enemies because of serving the Lord. Well, I think God's people, the Bible says they that live godly will suffer persecution. I get that. The Lord had his enemies because he's God, and you understand that. But here's the thing that we have to understand. God is able to allow those enemies not to do anything against us and keep them at bay. So then why then would any enemy have any assault against us in any degree? Because God allows that. God allows that to happen for testings, for trials. Sometimes it's because God is hardening the heart of the enemies, and he's using God's people or God's person to do that. When you think about in Egypt where Pharaoh's heart was hardened, God knew that Pharaoh would make the decisions he would make. And when God put all those big decisions for him to make in his path, God knew what they would be. And every time Pharaoh decided against the will of God, against what God wanted, then his heart became hardened. And God can use that. Just like when we have a soft heart, if you please, a heart that's obedient, a heart that wants to do God's will, then God can put things in our life and our heart doesn't get hardened. In fact, it may get softer, more pliable. We become more obedient because God knows what comes in our life, and God knows the purpose of that. So I do believe here that we can have enemies that don't do anything against us because we are doing the things that please the Lord. So really, if we have a lack of understanding or it's hard to believe what all this says, here's what we do know for sure, okay? Here's what we know, and here's our action, if you please. When a man's ways please the Lord. So let's decide, I'm going to please the Lord. Number one, because it's right to please the Lord. I want to please the Lord. And you know what? Even the Bible says, when a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. So that's where God says, I do that. I can make that happen. And none of us probably realize all the things that God does for us to any degree anyway. All right, we're going to stop right there on this Wisdom Wednesday. Hope you have a great day, safe day, healthy day. Lord willing, we'll see you back tomorrow. We'll be in the book of Judges tomorrow, and thank you for watching.